The Hawaiian Islands are often described as a paradise, a landscape where cliffs plunge into endless blue, where jungles hum with life, and where the sea never sleeps. Yet, within that paradise, shadows can stretch long. The beauty of Maui's North Shore hides dangerous currents, jagged cliffs, and places where someone can vanish without a sound. For Laura Vogel, Hawaii was home and sanctuary. She was 43 years old in 2010, a woman who had chosen a path of independence. She wasn't bound to a corporate office or the traditional rhythms of work and family. Instead, Laura lived by her own design. She worked as a tutor, guiding students one-on-one, and the flexibility of her career gave her space to nurture her real passions: the ocean, the wild places, and the freedom of living life on her own terms. Friends and family described her as adventurous, deeply spiritual, and in love with the natural world. She wasn't reckless, but she wasn't afraid to push herself either. Hiking alone, surfing remote breaks, camping under the stars. These were not occasional hobbies. They were the fabric of her daily life. On Maui, where the jungle meets the sea in untamed beauty, Laura felt alive. In February 2010, she was doing what she loved, heading out on a solo camping trip. For most people, the idea of being alone in such rugged terrain might seem intimidating, but for Laura it was second nature. She knew the land, respected its dangers, and found a deep peace in those solitary escapes. There was no reason to think this trip would be any different. On February 21st, Laura reached out to a friend by text. The message was short, almost casual. She said she was camped down the way from Birthing Pools and that she was meeting locals. The Birthing Pools, a set of natural tide pools along Maui's jagged coast, were a place of both wonder and risk. They were beautiful, carved into the volcanic rock, but they were also known for strong waves and treacherous cliffs. Tourists were often warned about venturing too close. Laura, though, wasn't a tourist. She understood the dangers better than most. That text would become the last clear communication anyone had from her. The next morning, the world moved on as usual. The ocean churned, winds bent the palms, locals and visitors alike carried on with their lives. But Laura's voice, normally a steady presence for her family and students, was absent. She didn't return calls, didn't follow up with friends, didn't come back from her short adventure. At first, perhaps, no one thought too much of it. After all, this was Laura, independent, spontaneous, known to follow her own rhythms. But silence stretched into unease. Who was Laura, really? To understand the weight of her disappearance, one must understand the life she chose. She had left behind the more conventional paths years before. She wasn't someone who simply lived for weekends or vacations. Her life was built around balance, earning enough to support herself and spending as much time as possible in the places she loved most. It wasn't always easy, but she thrived in that independence. For her, the outdoors wasn't an escape, it was home. Those who knew her said she wasn't careless. She was seasoned. She'd spent years navigating trails, watching tides, and making calculated choices in unpredictable environments. For that reason, when her absence became obvious, it was immediately alarming. If Laura hadn't come back, if she hadn't been heard from, it wasn't because she had lost track of time or chosen to vanish into the wilderness. Something was wrong. The scene around the Birthing Pools was as raw and unforgiving as it was beautiful. The coastline there doesn't forgive mistakes. A wrong step could send someone tumbling into jagged lava rock or the violent crash of surf. At the same time, the area wasn't isolated. The North Shore drew surfers, campers, and drifters alike. By the late 2000s, certain parts of the island had become gathering points for transient communities, places where strangers came and went, and where the line between paradise and peril often blurred. For Laura to say she was meeting locals in her last message hinted at contact, at interactions that could have been entirely harmless or not. As the hours passed and her silence deepened, the first threads of unease began to unravel into panic. Her van, her lifeline on the island, would soon be discovered standing quiet near the Pauwela Lighthouse. But that discovery lay ahead. In the moment after her last text, in the hours before the world realized she was gone, Laura Vogel's life was poised on a knife's edge between routine and catastrophe. The tragedy of unsolved mysteries is that they often begin so quietly, not with a scream or a sudden break in the pattern, but with something deceptively ordinary. A short camping trip, a casual message, a familiar place. Laura had taken countless trips like this before, and by all accounts, she was at peace that night. Camping near the pools, surrounded by the sound of the waves, the island stars burning overhead. But within hours, she would become one of Hawaii's most haunting mysteries. A woman swallowed by silence, her fate hidden somewhere between the paradise she loved and the shadows that lingered at its edges. You're watching Trace of Evil, where we reveal true crimes, unsolved disappearances, and mysteries surrounding crime. Like and subscribe to watch more episodes from our channel. Let's get back into the story of Laura Vogel. On the morning of February 22, 2010, the quiet edge of Maui's north shore stirred with unease. A white van sat parked near the Pauwela Lighthouse, a lonely landmark perched above the restless Pacific. The lighthouse had seen countless storms and tides, its beams sweeping over the dark waters. But on that morning, what stood near it carried the weight of something darker than wind or waves. The van belonged to Laura Vogel. It was the mobile anchor of her island life, filled with the essentials she carried on every outing: surfboards, a laptop, supplies for both work and leisure. For anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary vehicle abandoned after a late-night stop. But for Laura's friends and family, the details made the scene immediately suspicious. The driver's side door was wide open, swinging lightly in the breeze. The keys were still in the ignition, dangling as though the driver had stepped out just for a moment, intending to return. But Laura never did. Inside, her surfboards rested neatly, untouched. Her laptop was there too, expensive and essential to her tutoring work, but it hadn't been taken. To investigators, that detail stood out like a beacon. A thief would have stripped the van in minutes. But this wasn't theft. It was something else. More unsettling was what wasn't there. Her wallet and her cell phone were missing. Without them, there was no way to know if Laura had simply stepped away or if someone else had walked away with her. The van itself felt staged, a snapshot frozen mid-scene with its owner erased. The lighthouse cliffs are not a gentle place. The Pauwela Point juts into the ocean like a jagged knife, battered endlessly by waves. Down below, the water churns against volcanic rock. The trail in and out is steep, carved through scrub and grass. The beauty of the spot hides how unforgiving it is. Standing near her abandoned van, the landscape itself seemed to whisper a dozen possibilities. Had she wandered too close to the edge? Had someone lured her away? Had she willingly gone down into the dark, planning to come back, only to never return? Searchers spread quickly through the area. They scanned the brush, the trails, the cliff edges. And then, a grim discovery. A broken piece of Laura's cell phone, lying not far from the cliffs near the birthing pools she had mentioned in her final text. Not intact, but shattered. A fragment that suggested struggle, or perhaps a desperate moment of impact. Alongside it, a single slipper. Not enough to prove anything, but enough to haunt. The pieces formed a pattern that didn't feel accidental. For investigators, the scene raised more questions than it answered. Why would Laura leave her van in such a vulnerable way? Keys in the ignition, door ajar, valuables untouched. Why take her wallet and phone, but nothing else? And if she had planned to camp or hike nearby, why was her vehicle parked in plain view, practically inviting notice? The Pauwela Lighthouse area was not entirely isolated. Just beyond the picturesque cliffs was a homeless encampment, a cluster of makeshift shelters and temporary dwellings. The community there was fluid, people drifting in and out, strangers passing through. To locals, it was a place both familiar and unsettling. For Laura to park her van there was not entirely unusual. She was known for her openness, her willingness to talk to anyone. But in hindsight, that trust could have placed her directly in harm's way. Officers combed the encampment, asking questions, searching for witnesses. Some said they hadn't seen her. Others claimed vague memories of a woman who might have matched her description. But no one could provide certainty. No one could draw the line from her van to wherever she had gone. What remained was a vehicle that looked less like a clue and more like a puzzle deliberately left unsolved. Family and friends flocked to the site, hearts heavy as they stared at the van that should have carried her home. To them, the scene wasn't consistent with an accident. Laura would never have left her belongings unprotected. She was cautious, disciplined. If she had gone to explore the pools or cliffs, she would have locked the doors, tucked away her valuables, secured her things. The way the van was left felt wrong, like someone else had touched it, arranged it, walked away with deliberate intention. Investigators scoured the cliffs and waters below with helicopters, divers, and search teams. The Pacific offered no answers. The lava rocks below were jagged and unforgiving, but there was no sign of a body. The jungle inland was dense, but no trail of struggle could be found. Only the van remained, standing stubbornly as a monument to a life interrupted. In cases of disappearance, vehicles often become the silent witnesses, the last physical tether to the missing. Laura's van told two stories at once: of a woman who should have been safe, returning soon, and of a mystery meticulously staged to erase her presence. For those who stood at Pauwela that day, staring at the lonely vehicle against the crashing surf, the questions were endless. What had drawn her away from it? Who had walked away with her phone and wallet? And why, in a place so open and exposed, had she vanished into silence without leaving a trace? The answers weren't in the van. They weren't in the cliffs. They weren't in the waters below. What the discovery at Pauwela Lighthouse revealed most was not clarity, but a deepening void. Laura Vogel's story had shifted from a quiet camping trip to a haunting mystery, and the van by the lighthouse marked the point of no return. When detectives traced Laura Vogel's final movements, one discovery unsettled them more than any other. Her phone had not gone silent immediately after her last text. Instead, in the hours following her disappearance, 2 outgoing calls were made. Neither went to family, neither to friends, neither to anyone in her known circle. The number belonged to a man Laura did not know. That detail changed the tone of the investigation. If the van at the Pauwela Lighthouse had raised suspicion, the phone activity pulled the case into darker territory. Phones are intimate trails. They tell stories even when their owners cannot. For Laura, her device had been as vital as her surfboard or camping gear, a link to the outside world while she ventured alone into wild places. And yet, when it should have been her lifeline, it was instead the thread of a chilling riddle. Detectives tracked the mysterious number. It led to a man, but when they questioned him, he claimed something startling. He hadn't used that phone line in years. The number, he said, was inactive. It should not have been receiving calls at all. Yet records showed that Laura's phone had dialed it twice. The man's name was withheld, but law enforcement quickly labeled him a person of interest. What did those calls mean? Had Laura placed them herself, reaching out for help in a moment of panic? Had someone else, whoever last held her phone, dialed the number deliberately? Or were they misdials, random taps in a frantic moment? Each possibility carried weight. Each painted a different story of her final hours. The fact that the man insisted the number had not been in use for years only made matters worse. If he was telling the truth, then who had answered? Or more disturbingly, why did Laura's phone connect at all? The broken fragments of her phone, later found near the cliffs, suggested violence or desperation. Phones do not shatter on their own. For investigators, the idea formed: perhaps she had struggled with someone. Perhaps the phone had been damaged in the confrontation, calls made in the chaos. If she had dialed the number herself, perhaps she had hoped for a lifeline, pressing any contact she could in panic, not realizing the call went nowhere. To her family, this detail was devastating. Laura was not reckless with her communications. Every message she sent, every call she made had purpose. For her to reach out to a stranger's number was wildly out of character, unless something forced her into it. Theories bloomed in every direction. Some believed the calls were evidence of foul play. Someone had taken her phone, perhaps the same person who left her van abandoned, and used it briefly before discarding it. Maybe those calls were to an accomplice, a way of signaling after the act was done. Others argued the calls could have been accidental, made while the phone was in someone else's pocket, damaged and misfiring as it broke. But there was another possibility, whispered among locals, that Laura herself had made them, dialing at random as she realized something was terribly wrong. If she had felt threatened, trapped in a confrontation with strangers near the pools or the encampment, might she have tried a last desperate move? Any number, any chance that someone on the other end might answer? The police pressed the man linked to the number, but no hard evidence tied him to Laura's disappearance. He denied knowing her. He denied receiving the calls. And without her phone intact, without the data logs that might have revealed exact timing and GPS, there was little more they could prove. For the public, the story of the ghost calls transformed Laura's disappearance from a possible accident into something far more sinister. An accidental fall into the ocean would not explain why her phone dialed twice afterward. A voluntary disappearance would not require staged calls to a stranger. The phone activity was the crack in the surface, the one detail that refused to sit quietly within the frame of a simple missing persons case. It was a detail that haunted her family most of all. They knew Laura as careful, alert, capable. For her to vanish without trace was impossible enough. But for her phone, her voice to the outside world, to reach out into the darkness with 2 unanswered calls, that was unbearable. Those numbers, those minutes might have been her last chance at survival. Investigators eventually released their person of interest. No charges, no arrests, no answers. The ghost calls remained just that, echoes without origin, whispers of a voice lost somewhere between the cliffs and the sea. And so the mystery deepened. Laura Vogel had not simply disappeared into the wilderness. She had left behind a trace, faint and fractured, of human interaction. A digital breadcrumb that pointed toward another presence in her final hours. Someone else, unseen, unaccounted for, was part of her story. What remained was silence, interrupted only by the eerie question: who had those calls been meant for, and why did they lead nowhere? As the years stretched on, Laura Vogel's disappearance transformed from an urgent investigation into a lingering scar on the town of Rosendale. The once busy search parties gave way to whispers at the local diner, and the billboards offering rewards grew faded under the weight of passing seasons. Yet, for Laura's family and those who had known her, the absence never dulled. It sharpened. Every holiday without her, every family gathering with an empty chair, reminded them that something terrible had taken place on that quiet October night in 1993. Detectives who had worked the case described it as one of the most confounding mysteries of their careers. Despite thousands of man-hours, dozens of interviews, and an exhaustive search of the surrounding forests, rivers, and abandoned quarries, not a single trace of Laura ever surfaced. No clothing, no personal items, no remains. It was as though she had been swallowed by the night, leaving nothing but questions in her wake. The theories that emerged over the decades were as haunting as the silence of the evidence. Some investigators believed Laura had been abducted, pulled into a passing car by someone who knew how to vanish without a trace. Others argued that she may have been the victim of a violent crime closer to home, that someone within her circle of acquaintances had silenced her. Then there were the darker whispers, that the wild, wooded areas surrounding Rosendale concealed secrets no search team could ever uncover. Deep wells, hidden mine shafts, and vast forests offered endless places for someone to disappear, whether by accident or design. But for Laura's parents, speculation was no substitute for truth. They kept her story alive, working with advocacy groups and missing persons organizations to make sure her name wasn't forgotten.